All right, so let's take a look at the first assignment, the database management systems, the data modeling assignment. So, all right, so we haven't had a chance to do this just yet in class. We'll get started today, but I want to make sure that I cover the assignment before we leave. So this is tries to simulate what might happen when you get started in a project. You have a client and you meet with them. There might be several interviews that you might have with several folks that are the stakeholders of the project, and they might ramble on and on and on about the problems that they have and how you might help. A lot of the information that they might come to you with is irrelevant with what might actually be needed to be done. A lot of it will be relevant, and it's your responsibility to sift and decide and ask right questions and decide. Oh well, out of all what you've told me, well, this is relevant and that's not. And that's our job, right? Uh, so there's a problem statement down below, presumably from a conversation that you might have had with clients, and it's basically describing an online learning systems like Blackboard, right? And it's kind of describing what the various use cases and what can you do with the system, such as create courses and sections and enroll folks in courses. And you have two kinds of audience. You have the faculty who are using this tool to create the content, right? They create the various modules. They create they can add videos and homeworks and assignments and quizzes and whatnot. And then you have a different audience, which is the students who can then consume that content, right? So anyway, so this is the problem statement that you can create semesters, fall and whatnot. And so what it's asking you to do is, given this problem statement, go through the exercise of doing use case analysis of trying to model this system. How would you create the data structures that you would need for modeling this particular problem? Okay. Usually it starts with a set of interviews. We're going to skip that part. So this is what has been caught or has been captured or distilled after that meeting. Okay, perhaps after several meetings of having determined and sifted and filtered out a lot of the useless information, right? That they might have rambled on, that was irrelevant. So what's here is relevant. What has the resulting. Perhaps you might find some inconsistencies, some missing information. Is very common. The client very often will leave out information that is obvious to them, right? And will not even mention it. Okay, and it is our responsibility to fill in those gaps, right? Like they might talk about the employee, but never talk about the fact that employees have a first name and last name, username and password, right? And so you'll need to use some of your own judgment that even though it's not explicitly listed in the problem statement, those are common fields that would have to be there. Yes. So some of it is your own decisions, right? Of what might be missing, and so I'm sure this first assignment there will be a lot of questions back and forth on Piazza. It says, hey, how about this field? And what about this other field, right? Should we use this data type versus that other data type? I could, it would be very common that I could use that or the other. So that's fine. That would be part of the experience, right? So I'll be the client, and you can bombard me with these kinds of questions, and I'll try to respond as quickly as possible. So I'll probably put a post on Piazza where all questions about the assignment we can keep track of them. Okay. So part of the exercise is to identify the nouns and the verbs. Okay. The nouns will be a clue on what data has to be captured. Okay. The courses, the sections, the the assignments, the lectures, the videos, right? All those are nouns, right? And each one of these nouns presumably has all sorts of attributes, right? How long is the video, right? Thumbs up, you love all my videos. And you've all gone to my YouTube channel and subscribed and follow me. The verbs instead establish kind of a relationship of the relationship between the nouns. How are the nouns related to one another, right? And so between these two gives you a clue of what the class diagram might be, right? What the various entities are, what the attributes are. Now, it's often the case that you might be very familiar with a particular domain, or you might not be familiar with the domain, right? So you might bring your own biases from other projects that you might have worked on, right? You've been working on finance types of projects, so you already know what an instrument is, what a transaction, what all these. It's your domain. You breathe this in and out. But for some reason, somebody put you on a project which is healthcare, and you have no idea of the domain, right? And so you might not have any bias. You might not have any backwards experience. So depending on your familiarity of the particular domain, uh, for you, every noun might be as important as any other noun. Yes? And it might not be clear to you that certain nouns are actually attributes of other nouns. They might be actually adjectives or are describing other nouns. Yes? Right? For you, they're all equally the same. They're all equally, you're equally ignorant of any one of these nouns. Right? As opposed to if it's a domain that you know of, you understand that first name is just not any noun. It's a first name is something that describes a person. Yes? So it usually might be an attribute of some other noun. Yes? Make sense? But if you don't know the domain, you might not know that. So for you, everything's a class. First name is a class, last name is a class, and person is a class. Right? They're all equally important to you because you can't distinguish. Right? So one of the things that this asks you to do is describe the nouns, the verbs, how they're related. Oftentimes, the relationship between nouns is binary. You have two nouns that are tied by one verb, right? The boy hit the ball, right? The boy is related to the ball by the verb hit. It's binary. Two nouns related by one verb. Right? But oftentimes, it might be three nouns or four nouns that are related in a verb phrase, right? Where you might say, a professor gave this student this grade in this section. Right? So there's four things that are related there. Okay? And you have to identify those nouns in that verb phrase are somehow related to one another. So you have to capture that relationship between those four things. Right? Uh, uh, Other things that so you have to list the nouns, list the verbs. Also, there might be generalization. Generalizations are inheritance, right? Where you might have a person and you might have a faculty, a student. They're both persons. They both inherit from one base class. Yes. So you need to be able to capture these things. Identify all the generalizations, all the specializations, inheritance, and you'll need to capture that in a UML diagram. Also, all sorts of associations, aggregations, and compositions. We'll talk about that in a little bit on how things are associated to one another, whether it's a one-to-one or many-to-many or one-to-many relationships. Whether one things is a lots of several things make a whole part. Lots of doors in a car. A car might have many doors. Yes. So a car has like an aggregate, a composition of multiple doors. Yes. Or might have several fingers. So there's these associations, aggregations, and compositions. You're looking for these types of has relationships, of parents having children. Then classes versus attributes. It might be that at first for you everything's a class, right? And you can't distinguish which nouns are actually just attributes of some other nouns, right? So you need to make a decision. Is professor important enough to have its own class, or does it have to be an attribute of some other class? Yes? Certainly in the example that we've seen, professors were not worthy of their own class, right? They were just an attribute of some other class. Yes? Well, you have to make that decision. Is it a class? Is it an attribute? You need to decide. Obviously, the correct data types, if it's a date, a string, an integer, a list, array, enumeration, yada, yada. Also, cardinalities, how many of one participates in a relationship, right? If you have actors and movies, then it's like a many to many, right? A movie has many actors, and an actor can be in many movies, so it's a many to many. Or an actor can have many Oscars, right? So it's a one to many, perhaps, of one Oscar, or many reviews, or many nominations, or whatever. It's a one to many relationship. So it's asking you how many are participating in those relationships, and we'll do that in class. It might be that we're asking you, as you walk your way through this, we want to see an evolution of your class diagrams, right? First, we want to see your first take on what the class diagram looks like. And we're looking for like very naive starting point of a class diagram. And then we want to see an evolution of your decision making. It says, well, at first I thought these might be different classes, but then I realized that one was actually an attribute of the other. Right? We want to see that train of thought, okay, and you demonstrating that train of thought, of your decisions of realizing one thing or another. Make sense? Or making a decision that says, I thought it was just these two classes, but it's actually three classes that are related to one another. We want to see that, okay? We don't just want to see the end result, okay? We don't just want to see, this is the best class diagram, and it might be correct, right? But instead, we want to see an evolution of saying, well, here's my first take, and here's my second version, and here's my final version, right? We want to see you think through the problem. So we want to see if you've, we'll talk about this today, but removing any inadequate or any redundancy that you might find. Some of your first associations between the classes, you might have some redundancy. Every time you have a cycle in a diagram, that may be a candidate redundancy, right? So wait a minute, I can navigate the diagram one way. I can also navigate it the other way, right? So it's up to you, depending on the queries, depending on how you're going to use the database. It might be a redundancy, it might not be a redundancy. So we want to hear from you, why is it a redundancy or not, right? Whether the relationship should be removed or not, and we'll see examples of that today. Reification, we'll talk about that, where there might be certain things that are totally fine on paper, right? That you design it in your class diagram, it's perfect, but when you go and actually try to convert it into a relational database, it's actually impossible to implement, right? A classical example is a many-to-many relationship, right? Or an inheritance, right? There's just certain things that are fine to be drawn in a UML diagram, but it's just not implementable in a relational database. Okay, so like in a many-to-many, it's fine that you would say star and star. You have many of these are related, like actors and movies. You could just say, well, many actors are related to many movies, and you're done in a UML diagram. But then when you're going to convert that into a relational database, it's impossible to implement. Okay? You have to have a middle class in the middle that does the mapping between the two. Okay, so that is what we is referred to as to reify, to make concrete, right? Decisions that you make decisions to change your representations because it's just impossible to actually implement. Yes, right. So we want to hear any cases where you had to do that. Also, we're looking for You thinking out loud, right? We want to see you write your explanations and your arguments for making decisions when you decided that this was not an attribute, but was a class, or vice versa, right? That this was redundant, that I had to reify this, that I had to decide that these are the classes and nouns and whatnot. We're looking for prose, paragraphs to explain in proper English each one of your decisions as you progress through your class diagram. Make sense? Right? We'll work on that. We'll start today. We'll finish next week, and we'll see examples of that. All right? Make sense? All right. That's the first assignment.